To understand the shape of Avallac'h's life, one must first trace the contours of his bloodline. Among the Aen Elle, nobility is not simply a matter of inheritance or wealth. It is entwined with the long memory of blood, of origin, and of ancestral alignment with the world's old harmonies. Lineage is recorded in scrolls, in songs, in rituals, in the resonance a name carries when spoken aloud. In such a society, names are more than identities, they are legacies. Before we drift into the long shadow of Avallac'h's years, I'd be honored if you like this video and consider subscribing, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Cravan Esbain Ip Kayam Han Mocha was born into one of the elder lines of the Aen Elle, a branch known for its quiet authority and enduring philosophical bent. His family was not defined by military conquest or vast holdings of territory. Rather, their influence came from something older, from proximity to the deep arcana, from generations of scholars, visionaries, and record-keepers whose counsel had echoed through centuries of elven decision-making. Among the Aen Elle, theirs was a name spoken with understated weight, one associated with wisdom rather than rule, yet always near the pulse of power. The Aen Elle royal court, centered in the luminous city of Ithlinne, was built on the principle of celestial inheritance, rulership determined by harmonic correspondence to the cycles of magic and the world's deeper currents. Within that framework, Avallac'h's bloodline held a peculiar distinction. Though not of the royal family itself, his house was one of the few permitted to intermarry with its cadet branches. This quiet privilege signaled trust, esteem, and the acknowledgement that his ancestry carried something valuable, not only in prestige, but in potential. In the early years of his life, Avallac'h was not expected to lead. He was expected to observe. As a child, he was surrounded by symbols of knowledge, scrollwork chambers carved with ancestral memories, crystal instruments for mapping stellar conjunctions, archives of whispered lore passed only from one severn to another. In this environment, scholarship was the family's legacy and the quiet study of the cosmos was the essence of it. From a young age, it became clear that Avallac'h's mind did not function like that of his peers. He grasped the language of celestial alignments before he fully understood speech. His dreams were laced with fragments of languages no longer spoken, and his sense of time was often described by tutors as unnerving, as if he were remembering rather than learning. Such traits, while unsettling to some, were recognized by his elders as signs of deeper knowing. And among the Aen Elle, such knowing is never ignored. In many accounts, Avallac'h's early years at court were marked by paradox. He was deeply introspective, reluctant to engage in the usual social theatre of the nobility, yet he became an unavoidable presence in strategic councils. He spoke little, but when he did, he asked questions others did not dare frame. His lineage allowed him this space, protected from dismissal by the gravitas of his ancestry, yet not so enmeshed in royal politics that he posed a direct threat. This gave him a rare freedom. He was watched, but not yet bound. It is also during this period that the first whispers emerged about his affiliation with the ancient prophecy of Ithlinne. His family's lineage traced itself, albeit obliquely, toward the convergence point from which the elder bloodline would eventually emerge. While he was not a direct ancestor of Lara Dorren, he was connected to the lattice of magical genealogies that surrounded her emergence. To those who studied the old prophecies, this made him a figure of immense interest, a possible key, or a cipher, or a warning. Over time, his presence at court evolved from that of a curious young noble to something more arcane. He began spending extended periods in isolation, retreating into sealed towers or venturing into the glacial hinterlands where magical disturbances were said to linger. When he returned, he brought diagrams. It became clear that he was no longer simply inheriting knowledge, he was building upon it. Mapping patterns no one had seen, naming phenomena others only felt. Though Avallac'h never sought political office, his insights began to influence royal policy. This was not done publicly. His counsel was rarely formalized, and he did not address the court with speeches. Rather, monarchs came to him privately, sometimes in secrecy, to seek interpretation of visions, of omens, of subtle shifts in magical tide. In these exchanges, his lineage gave weight to his words, but it was his mind that commanded reverence. There were, of course, those who mistrusted him. The more militaristic factions of the Aen Elle court, led by figures like Giles and others of the command caste, found Avallac'h's quiet influence unnerving. He did not speak of strategy, yet his guidance shaped military decision-making. He did not hold command, yet kings adjusted their paths after speaking with him. To some, this was wisdom. To others, it was interference. Still, his noble origin shielded him. And more than that, it framed him as part of the structure, a continuation of ancient roles rather than a deviation from them. He was a function of the court itself, as old and necessary as the seasons. And because of that, even those who distrusted him rarely dared move against him directly. Among the Aen Elle, the distinction between seer and noble was seldom crossed. Those born into prophetic vision rarely held the blood required to sit near the throne. And those born into power rarely possessed the gift of knowing. Avallac'h was one of the very few whose bloodline held both. He was not royalty, but he stood near it. He was not merely a sage, but one whose words could echo into law. In this convergence, he became something unique. A node where tradition, insight, and potential collided. As the years passed, this position would draw him toward increasingly complex undertakings, experiments in inheritance, in dimensional mapping, in the reshaping of fate itself. There are names whispered in the deep woods of the continent, murmured by ancient trees and echoed through groves long forgotten by men. Names passed like gentle currents beneath the still waters of elven thought, old titles, bound by knowing. Among the Aen Elle and Aen Elle, there exists no priesthood, no true castes of scholars or prophets. There are the Aen Elle, the knowing ones, rare and revered, set apart by perception. They claim no power and require no thrones. Their realm is foresight, and their dominion lies in time's current. The Aen Elle emerged long before the cataclysmic conjunction of the spheres, when the elven people still roamed plains untouched by human sight. They were never numerous. In truth, their rarity formed the core of their role. To be Severn was a condition, an inherited way of perceiving the world, or perhaps of being perceived by it. They did not learn their insight through books alone. It arrived in dreams, visions, strange echoes in stone and starlight, often in childhood. And when it did, it was not taught, only recognized. Their presence was never codified in elven law, nor were they given temples or formal power. Yet kings would kneel before them, and queens would weep in their company. They were the custodians of memory and shape, the ones who felt time as a pattern of breath and return. Among the Aen Elle, some would later call them seers, others sages. Among the Aen Elle, they were something quieter, the anchor to truths not spoken aloud. In either tongue, the meaning was consistent. These were the ones who saw further. The title itself, Aen Elle, resists precise translation. Some render it as those who know. Others insist it means something closer to those who remember, or even those through whom the knowing passes. None of these are wholly accurate, and all of them are close. The Severn did not merely possess knowledge, they were shaped by it, bearers of truths whose origin was often unclear even to themselves. In elven society, knowledge had always been a sacred current, and the Severn became conduits through which it flowed. They kept no libraries, built no academies. Their teachings were offered in fragments, symbols, in soft warnings or questions that would echo decades after they were spoken. When asked for counsel, they rarely gave instruction. Instead, they would guide attention. A pause beside a flowering tree. A story with no ending. A mirror held just so. Their insight was revealing. They turned the world to face itself. Their gift was not without burden. To see too far was to live partially unmoored from one's own time. Many Severn were solitary by nature, drawn to quiet places where they could hear the threads of the world unbraid and reweave. Some went wandering, drawn to the boundaries of known lands and thought. Others remained near the courts, watching generations pass, whispering to those who would listen and turning away from those who would not. Their lifespans, even among elves, seemed subtly distorted, stretched or paused, like flame behind glass. It was said that the Severn could read the winds between worlds, sensing fractures where planes brushed against one another. They were attuned to liminal spaces, rivers, mountain passes, caves where echoes returned before they were made. For most, this sensitivity was mystical, even poetic. For some, like Avallac'h, it became the foundation of theory. The Severn were not only philosophers. In rare cases, they were scientists of the unseen, thinkers who tried to codify the murmurs of fate into diagrams, alignments, and thresholds. They studied mystery. Within both the Aen Elle and the Aen Elle, the Severn occupied a paradoxical position. They were revered, yet never quite trusted. Their visions were both feared and sought. When their words aligned with a ruler's will, they were exalted as visionaries. When their foresight contradicted power, they were called mad or dangerous. Yet even in exile, none could truly silence them. The knowing ones did not speak to persuade. They spoke because they could not do otherwise. Avallac'h was one of the last born into this lineage, and perhaps the most troubling. His knowing was not passive. Where most Severn offered observation, he offered application. He asked not only what might come, but how it might be shaped. To the elders, this marked him as disruptive. To the ambitious, it made him indispensable. And to the future, it made him dangerous. But long before his name echoed in the marble halls of Aen Elle, or was whispered by kings and scholars across distant spheres, he was simply one among the knowing. A quiet child with the eyes of a man who had already seen too much. In the years that followed, he would bend what he saw into theory, into architecture, into destiny itself. But the roots of all his work, the mirror-wrought corridors, the dreaming towers, the prophetic bindings, lay in the old ways of the Aen Severn. They taught that time could not be changed, only better understood. That fate was not a line, but a loom. That memory, when properly tended, could open doors in the fabric of the world. And Avallac'h, the sage, would spend lifetimes walking the threshold of those doors, studying not only what they revealed, but what they withheld. Aen Elle rises like a vision caught between memory and dream. The city unfolds in circles, arcs, and radiating curves, shaped by the rhythm of ley lines and the pulse of elven song. Its towers lean with quiet purpose toward constellations charted in the first times. Bridges breathe with magical resonance, and windows bloom open to meet the movement of the sun. Within this space, governance is not confined to chambers and councils. It is woven into architecture, garden design, and the calibrated placement of every threshold. The court at Aen Elle reflects the cosmology of the Aen Elle, a society shaped by harmony rather than hierarchy, where rank flows from attunement to ancient forces. The royal line holds power through alignment with cyclical phenomena, solar rhythms, lunar patterns, seasonal transitions. Monarchs are chosen with regard to magical resonance as well as ancestry, and their legitimacy is affirmed through ritual observances performed at sacred intersections of time and place. Coronations involve not oaths, but attunements. Around the monarch, a lattice of noble houses provides continuity and interpretation. These houses are responsible for stewarding knowledge, cultivating magical traditions, and maintaining the city's resonance with the world beyond. Each house is associated with a distinct metaphysical domain: star law, elemental harmonics, spatial theory, inheritance, dreaming, and their contributions to the court are not dictated by law but by rhythm. Assemblies form in response to celestial signs. Deliberation occurs within shifting sanctuaries of magical calm. Words hold power in such places, and decisions are cast like stones into a reflecting pool, their ripples felt across realms. Avallac'h's presence in this court carried the resonance of lineage and insight intertwined. His movements through the city rarely followed official summons. He appeared at councils just before omens were interpreted, and he often withdrew when political tensions stirred toward misalignment. His presence steadied the chamber. His absence marked a season of uncertainty. He held no title, but the architecture adjusted to him. Doors opened on his approach. Stairways extended where none had stood the day before. The city's enchantments recognized his pattern. He frequented the older levels of Aen Elle, the hollowed halls beneath the silver pools, the stargazing chambers lined with fossilized pollen, the narrow corridors where echoes returned in languages not heard for an age. These spaces awaited minds prepared to enter them. The monarch of Avallac'h's time, whose name echoes only in formal song, regarded him with consistent deference. Court historians described their interactions as contemplative rather than directive. They spoke in long silences. Decisions were clarified through presence. Avallac'h's guidance entered policy as a gravitational shift. His insights moved quietly across documents, visions, and architecture, reflected in the spacing of towers, the timing of envoys, the renewal of ancient wards. His knowledge shaped the court's calendar. The flow of time in Aen Elle followed more than seasonal cycles. It echoed predictive curves derived from magical saturation, ancestral convergence, and dream recurrence. Avallac'h's calculations informed these transitions. His charts, etched on semilucid crystal and read through induced trance, became reference points for the city's civic decisions. Trade agreements, diplomatic receptions, and court rituals unfolded in patterns traced from his diagrams. They were affirmations of deeper rhythm. His influence extended into education. Young nobles destined for roles in the court were occasionally sent to observe his work. He offered no curriculum. Instead, he walked through thresholds of layered meaning, pointed towards silence, and allowed them to hear. Most did not return unchanged. A few returned mute. None returned untouched. Aen Elle relied on such presences. The court's strength came from balance. Avallac'h contributed to this balance by maintaining attention on long patterns, inherited currents, prophetic fragments, ancestral overlays. His work did not oppose politics, it recontextualized it. Within his diagrams, even discord found shape. The city itself held memory. Pavements shimmered faintly with the imprint of ancient footsteps. Balconies remembered who had stood upon them. The great reflecting basin in the Hall of Renewal responded to thought with waves of color. Within such a living city, the presence of a Severn shaped more than mood. It altered cadence. Avallac'h's movements through the court introduced new possibilities. His research affected climate chambers. His dreams influenced the bloom of sky gardens. The court's response to his work was cumulative. No single edict or decree ever referenced his name. Yet his insight permeated decisions, chamber design, and magical thresholds. When the Aen Elle prepared their great observatories for the coming of a cross-world eclipse, it was Avallac'h who named the hour. When the monarch commissioned a new sanctum for archival dreaming, it was his geometry that informed its spiral. In Aen Elle, such influence was not seen as extraordinary. Those born of certain lineages, gifted with rare patterns of perception, became part of the city's internal weather. They were attended to like tides, or moonlight, or the scent of long-forgotten flowers returning on the wind. Among the deeper currents of elven thought, genealogy is a cartography of resonance, a map of potential. The Aen Elle held no rigid division between magic and inheritance, for they understood that the flow of power often moved along ancestral lines, like water seeking its level through stone. To trace one's bloodline was to trace the flow of forces older than memory. And within these ancient lines, there existed a thread that gleamed with uncommon intensity. It came to be known as Aen Elle, the elder blood. Avallac'h did not discover this thread. It had been whispered through the archives for centuries, marked on fragmentary tablets and hinted at in the dreaming chants of the Severn. But he was the first to systematize its study, to gather the diffuse myths, isolate the lineages, and bind them into a cohesive theory of magical heredity. His research was not born of idle curiosity. It emerged as a long meditation on convergence. He saw in elder blood not a power to be used, but a phenomenon to be understood, a conjunction within flesh that echoed the greater conjunction that had once bound worlds together. The early stages of his inquiry were quiet. He began by collecting family trees from noble houses, comparing recorded abilities with lineal structures. He sought patterns in anomalies, sudden prophecies, surges of magical saturation, instances where an otherwise average lineage produced a child with vision or displacement. These occurrences, scattered and infrequent, revealed a repeating shape, subtle at first, but unmistakable over time. The elder blood, he concluded, was a rhythm of recurrence. As his studies deepened, Avallac'h turned toward older records, those preserved in dream archives, carved into the bone script of extinct dialects, or stored within sentient crystals that responded only to specific harmonic keys. These relics whispered of ancestors not bound by any single world, beings whose presence could not be traced through traditional means, but whose influence persisted like a watermark through elven history. The elder blood, in these sources, was spoken of as a frequency, an attunement to dimensional thresholds, a capacity to walk where others could not. Within this framework, Lara Dorren emerged as a singular convergence. Her lineage contained not only the inherited echo of Aen Elle, but also the potential to transmit it across species, a possibility few among the Aen Elle had ever considered. Most had assumed the elder blood would remain within elven kind, contained and cyclical. But Avallac'h's genealogical models revealed a different shape. They showed a spiral, a bloodline moving outward. This insight shifted the foundation of his work. The study of inheritance became a study of thresholds. His diagrams grew more elaborate. They now included symbols from ancient prophecies, points of cross-world alignment, and the projected outcomes of various unions. His notebooks, preserved in crystal vaults beneath Aen Elle, charted not only known marriages, but speculative ones, pairings that might never occur, yet revealed possible futures. These were models of energetic compatibility, rendered through harmonic overlay and ancestral resonance. Each model represented a possible unfolding of the elder blood, a path by which its resonance might reawaken or fade. The methodology was rigorous. Avallac'h's calculations involved temporal drift, dimensional saturation, and genetic recurrence ratios far beyond the grasp of most elven scholars. He worked within frameworks where time did not move linearly, and where inheritance could skip generations or re-emerge in altered form. His laboratories contained constructs of suspended lineage, symbolic renderings of possible heirs, each encoded with projected magical capacity. These constructs were metaphysical echoes, created to test the bounds of potential without crossing into action. At court, his work remained largely opaque. Those closest to the monarch received only fragments, summaries delivered with precision, devoid of commentary. The elder blood, he wrote, was not a gift or a threat. It was a vector, and like all vectors, it could be traced, measured, and, within limits, guided. His focus on Lara Dorren intensified. She was not simply a vessel of Aen Elle. She embodied the rare point where multiple ancestral threads converged with almost impossible precision. Her birth represented a kind of harmonic window, one that, once closed, might not reopen for millennia. To Avallac'h, she was a phenomenon, the product of rare alignment, and the beginning of something larger than any single life. He never claimed ownership of her destiny. His writings suggest a tone of quiet reverence, rather than control. He viewed her choices as variables. Her union with a human, though troubling to many, became a subject of intense recalculation. Avallac'h revised his genealogical projections to accommodate this change, seeking to understand its consequences. The descent of elder blood into human lineages introduced new uncertainty, and with it, new possibilities. As his research evolved, so too did his philosophical stance. The elder blood ceased to be a trait within a person. It became a pattern across time, an echo that could leap across species, reconfigure magical boundaries, and activate dormant alignments within worlds themselves. In this expanded view, genealogy was not about lineage alone. It was about structure, the hidden architecture through which magic flowed across generations and dimensions. In the oldest maps preserved by the Aen Elle, there are places that shimmer faintly on the page, sites that resist stable description, whose outlines flicker or shift depending on the angle of observation. They are markers of interstitial space, places where the fabric of reality thins, allowing passage across worlds. Among these rare points, one stands apart in clarity and resonance: the Tower of the Swallow. It appears in both Aen and Aen Elle records, though always veiled in poetic terms: the boundary that sings, the gate that remembers, the spire where voices echo before they are spoken. Avallac'h approached it as structure. He recognized in the tower's geometry a specific alignment with the deeper laws of dimensional resonance. To him, it was a conduit through which world energy refracted, a place not simply touched by magic, but formed from the logic of transition itself. The tower's position corresponds to a cluster of converging ley lines, magical currents that move through the architecture of time. Avallac'h identified these lines through harmonic triangulation, measuring fluctuations in magical saturation and prophetic bleed. His calculations indicated that the tower functioned as an anchor, stabilizing cross-world drift and allowing conscious traversal under specific conditions. The structure was not built in the usual sense. It had been called forth, shaped by the laws it revealed, not constructed by will. Inside the tower, space behaves differently. Distances elongate or compress. Sound refracts in loops. Time can decelerate into clarity or accelerate toward blurred threshold. Avallac'h described his first traversal as emergence, a process of realignment where perception adjusts to a new reality through recognition rather than transition. He noted that the tower's interior responded to thought patterns and emotional frequencies, creating chambers tailored to the traveler's cognitive shape. The structure observed as much as it revealed. This phenomenon became central to his theory of cross-world cognition. Avallac'h proposed that travel between spheres was a matter of portals, coordinates, and attunement. Each world carried a unique vibrational signature, a blend of physical law, magical density, and conceptual structure. To move between these realms required more than magical force. It required resonance. The traveler must match the target world's pattern through mental alignment and symbolic readiness. The tower served as a filter, allowing only those whose thoughts conformed to its frequencies to pass through without distortion. In his writings, Avallac'h distinguished between two forms of traversal. The first he called tangible displacement, the full relocation of body and mind across dimensional boundaries. The second he named projectional threading, a state in which consciousness, untethered from matter, could explore adjacent realities without full integration. This second form, often mistaken for dreaming or prophecy, became a key aspect of Severn practice. Within the Tower of the Swallow, the boundary between these modes dissolved. He constructed diagrams to map the structure's thresholds, dynamic glyphs that shifted based on the reader's mental focus. These glyphs reflected the tower's mutable architecture. Rooms formed from thought. Corridors unfolded along axes of memory. The tower preserved experience as spatial echo, and to walk its halls was to enter sequences of cause and possibility. Avallac'h returned to the tower many times. He documented its cycles, periods when access became effortless, and others when the structure withdrew into a state of dormancy. These rhythms corresponded to the flow of prophetic saturation in surrounding regions. When visions grew more frequent, When the Aen Elle dreamed in overlapping symbols, the tower brightened. When silence fell across the dreaming circles, its doors vanished. It was a structure that responded to thought at scale, aware of the collective psychic tone. This sensitivity led Avallac'h to a deeper conclusion. He proposed that the tower was not merely a bridge, but a participant. It did not serve those who approached it, it interacted with them, shaping their access, revealing only what aligned with their readiness. His language grew more contemplative here. He described the tower as a kind of silent interlocutor, an entity with no voice but endless grammar. It spoke through transition. The implications of this view extended into his broader cosmological framework. Avallac'h saw the universe as a fabric of resonant spaces, some overlapping, some drifting apart, all connected by structures like the tower. These anchors maintained the potential for movement, memory, and convergence. The Tower of the Swallow was part of a larger network, mostly hidden, waiting to be recognized rather than found. In this network, Avallac'h found the theoretical justification for many of his other pursuits: genetic recurrence, magical inheritance, dream projection, and the cartography of prophecy. Each of these became threads within a larger weave. The tower gave structure to his understanding, as phenomenon. It confirmed that convergence could be designed. Among the Aen Elle, the elder blood was a subject spoken of quietly, reverently, passed from voice to voice in long-form contemplation. Its presence lingered in ballads and diagrams, in the rituals of midwinter observance, and in the soft glimmer of certain names recorded only in starlight ink. The Severn recognized it not as a tool nor a burden, but as a principle, a phenomenon that moved through generations in ways the spoken world could not fully contain. Avallac'h came to regard the elder blood as a force shaped by design rather than intention. Its reappearances across centuries were pulses, intervals within a larger cycle of magical convergence. He wrote of the blood as a rhythm nested within the spiral of time itself. Where others saw genealogy, he saw pattern. Where others saw power, he saw continuity. In his earliest treatises, the elder blood was treated as a genetic frequency, a convergence of traits, events, and inherited magical sensitivities. But over time, his understanding moved beyond mechanism. He began to describe the blood as a signal, one that called forth particular outcomes within the flow of magical history. It brought circumstances into alignment. The bearer of the blood did not cause the storm, they were the bell rung in its silence. This framing had consequences. It allowed Avallac'h to shift the focus from ability to purpose. The elder blood manifested through narrative potential, the capacity to act as fulcrum within a set of unfolding probabilities. Bearers of the blood were not chosen. They emerged when the world moved through a precise curve in its long rotation. They were harmonic points where cause, memory, and possibility momentarily overlapped. In philosophical circles among the Aen Elle, this view echoed older concepts of mythic recurrence, the belief that some patterns, once born into the world, continue to echo until resolved. Avallac'h drew on these traditions, but introduced a structural refinement. He did not believe the elder blood repeated itself. He believed it spiraled, appearing in new forms, under new conditions, but always carrying the same relational role within the magical ecosystem. Each recurrence carried a slightly different valence. Each iteration brought the pattern closer to realization. In this model, destiny was shaped by alignment. The blood brought with it a set of pressures, tensions, and potentials. They set the stage. What happened upon that stage was the result of many factors: choice, memory, interference, resonance. The bearer of the blood lived within a field of density, where small acts carried greater weight. They were concentrated. This view allowed Avallac'h to frame his work in non-deterministic terms. He was mapping the field through which the pattern moved. His charts did not seek to control outcomes, but to understand the architecture of emergence. He wrote frequently about fulcrum states, moments in history where convergence made transformation possible. The elder blood, in his theory, acted as a lens during such moments, bringing hidden structures into view, magnifying latent tensions, clarifying unseen paths. He found echoes of this behavior in ancient rituals performed at magical nodes, rites where intention, placement, and inheritance combined to trigger temporary access to deeper realms. These rituals were not created by the elder blood, but they mirrored its shape. Both involved concentration, both invoked change, and both carried cost, measured in continuity disrupted. In time, Avallac'h came to view the elder blood as a kind of tuning fork. Its presence altered the field of possibility around it. Prophecies adhered to it. Dreams clustered near it. Magical phenomena bent toward it, like particles responding to a charged surface. The bearer did not control these effects. They lived through them, as one walks through a rain that falls in response to their footsteps. In his later writings, he returned to Lara Dorren as the first clear resonance point of the pattern. Her birth had concentrated multiple ancestral lines, each carrying fragmentary frequencies of the blood. Her life had moved through a precise corridor of alignment, opening the path through which the pattern could spiral outward into human lineages. Her choices had shifted the structure of magical inheritance across worlds. Her presence had widened it. This widening introduced uncertainty. The elder blood, once confined to elven patterns of governance and memory, now moved through human cultures with far less predictability. Avallac'h's response to this shift was measured. He did not seek to reclaim the blood for the Aen Elle. He sought to understand its new curvature. He traced its emergence through listening, following where it surfaced in dreams, in anomalies, in the quiet changes to magical law that accompanied its return. To him, the blood remained what it had always been, a principle of shape within the evolving structure of magic. It could not be removed, nor isolated. It could only be perceived, studied, and, when necessary, guided. He viewed this guidance as alignment, a way to help the pattern reach its fullest harmonic expression. In the deeper vaults beneath Ternalia, where light bends in slow spirals and silence accumulates like dew, Avallac'h constructed a series of spaces that did not obey the usual flow of time. They were sanctums of altered rhythm, places where the world slowed enough for hidden structures to emerge. To the untrained observer, these chambers appeared dormant, preserved in stillness. But within their walls, perception lengthened, thought expanded, and subtle changes took root. Avallac'h did not treat time as an adversary or a mystery. He approached it as a field of pressure, elastic, weighted, subject to influence. His earliest notes on temporal research described time as a surface that could be softened through attention, braided through intention, and refracted through memory. In these reflections, he made no claims of mastery. Instead, he outlined a method of cohabitation, a way of placing oneself near the edges of time's consistency in order to observe its variations more closely. The foundation of his work lay in deceleration. Avallac'h discovered that by layering harmonics within a closed space, using crystal resonance, mirrored light, and low-frequency magical currents, he could slow the experience of time without severing it from the world beyond. These chambers did not stop time, but they allowed it to stretch, making each second feel like many. A day within might correspond to an hour outside. More importantly, within that day, thought unfolded with unusual clarity. The mind, relieved of urgency, began to trace longer patterns, subtle rhythms that would be lost in ordinary speed. This effect became central to his genealogical modeling. The tracing of elder bloodlines required attention to thousands of variables, many of which shifted slightly with each potential union. To calculate these branches accurately, Avallac'h needed more than intellect. He needed stillness, a quiet wide enough to perceive generational echoes, recursive traits, and harmonic threads not evident in faster conditions. In slowed time, these connections emerged naturally, like frost forming along the edge of a leaf. He developed additional methods for exploring temporal variation. One involved the use of illusion-bound mirrors, constructs that reflected not the present moment, but potential divergences. These mirrors revealed how magical saturation and emotional intent could bend a lineage's expression under different conditions. Observing these mirrors over time allowed Avallac'h to chart how small differences in decision, placement, or ritual context could shift the shape of a future bearer's resonance. Another method involved architectural memory. Within certain corridors, he layered time-sensitive enchantments that preserved past moments as sensory echoes, brief intervals that could be re-entered through dream state or harmonic key. These echoes did not replay events. They preserved fields of presence, configurations of thought, mood, and possibility. By walking these corridors in meditative focus, Avallac'h could re-engage with moments of insight from years before. The ethical implications of these practices did not go unexamined. Avallac'h wrote often of the strain such distortions could place on perception. Those who spent prolonged time within slowed chambers found it difficult to readjust to ordinary flow. Memories lost their order. Emotional responses arrived out of sequence. For this reason, access to the inner sanctums was restricted. Over time, the chambers themselves became part of his research. He observed how extended deceleration altered magical affinity, not just within himself, but within the environment. Crystals grown within slowed time developed new refractive properties. Plants taken from the dreaming groves and placed in these spaces adapted in unexpected ways, flowering along lunar cycles rather than seasonal ones. These changes were documented meticulously as part of a broader theory, that time itself was a participant in magical development, a shaping force. This understanding deepened his approach to inheritance. Avallac'h began to include temporal context in his genealogical charts, noting not only who was born, but when and under what flow conditions. He marked instances where the blood seemed dormant for generations, only to resurface after a period of spatial or magical disruption. These resurgences followed patterns of historical drift. In his view, the elder blood did not vanish, it waited for resonance. His reflections on time were not limited to observation. He also explored how perception of time influenced magical sensitivity. He noted that those born within moments of celestial misalignment often experienced time differently. Dreams that ran backward, memories that arrived in layers. These individuals, though not always gifted in the conventional sense, served as indicators. They marked the edge of convergence, places where time curved near the path of the elder blood. In later years, Avallac'h returned frequently to these chambers, often alone, sometimes for weeks. His colleagues remarked on the changes in his speech after such intervals. Sentences that unfolded with deliberate rhythm, pauses filled with unspoken calculation, thoughts arranged with the gravity of years condensed into a day. He emerged with clearer questions. The chambers remain beneath Aen Elle, still active, still turning. Their entrances are sealed, their harmonics preserved. No one else has replicated their design. Their blueprints were never written. Their function depends on alignment, of architecture, of mind, of purpose. To enter them requires more than knowledge. It requires readiness. In the long chronicle of magical history, the conjunction of the spheres stands as a point beyond debate, a hinge upon which entire realities turned. It was not an invasion, nor a storm, nor an act of will. It was a realignment of realms, a collision of worlds that rearranged the cosmic weave and left lasting fissures in the flow of magic. Most accounts describe it in violent metaphors, as though it shattered the order of things. But among the Aen Elle, and especially within Avallac'h's reflections, the conjunction is spoken of with quieter language, as an alteration in rhythm, as a turning of deep and ancient cycles. Avallac'h's study of the conjunction was not a matter of reconstruction. He approached it as an event still partially unfolding, still echoing through the architecture of time. To him, the conjunction had shifted into a slower phase, one that could be read, understood, and aligned with if approached in the correct frame. He focused on discerning its shape. He began with residue. Across the Aen Elle realms, there were places where the conjunction had passed most deeply, fields where memory pooled in the soil, towers that still chimed without wind, and valleys where spells cast in one world could finish in another. These sites were marked by a thinness, a permeability between planes. Avallac'h referred to them as lattice points. They were not random. They formed a pattern, faint, precise, geometrically coherent. Tracing these points across worlds allowed him to map the conjunction's curve, like the wake of a vast, invisible vessel. He treated this map as a living archive. At each lattice point, he recorded shifts in magical saturation, rates of dream congruence, and fluctuations in elemental behavior. Over time, a secondary pattern began to emerge. The conjunction had created a gradient, a distribution of magical density that pulsed across worlds like a slow breath. This breath carried meaning. It shaped evolution. In realms touched more deeply, magical species bloomed or withered according to how closely their resonance aligned with the pulse. This framework allowed Avallac'h to study not only the event's footprint, but its long-term influence. The Aen Elle themselves, he concluded, had not escaped transformation. Though they viewed themselves as pre-conjunction beings, their perception, memory, and magical structures had subtly drifted. Their dreaming rhythms changed. Their sacred geometry bent slightly toward newer symmetries. They were adaptations, signs that the conjunction had not passed over them, but through them. To capture these adaptations, Avallac'h developed a method of historical memory. He crafted crystalline tablets that encoded ambient presence, recordings of how certain places felt before and after exposure to the conjunction's effects. These tablets could be read only by those trained in harmonic empathy, and even then, only during precise celestial conditions. They offered state. They preserved the atmosphere of before. He also collected testimonies from the oldest surviving beings, those whose lifespans reached across the threshold of the conjunction. These interviews were conducted as collaborative meditations. He asked questions slowly, often spaced by hours, allowing memory to rise without pressure. He was less interested in what happened and more attentive to how the world felt before it changed. From these sessions, he compiled a texture, a sense of how time moved before the worlds aligned. The tone of this work was contemplative. There is no urgency in Avallac'h's conjunction studies. He writes with patience, circling each insight as though orbiting a distant star. He views the event as emergence, a manifestation of deeper laws at a higher order of complexity. To him, the collision of worlds revealed the underlying weave of reality, the shared framework through which magic, time, and intention cohere. This outlook shaped his approach to cross-world theory. While others treated travel between spheres as a feat of magical might, Avallac'h saw it as a continuation of the conjunction's rhythm. Each crossing was a small reenactment, a localized echo of the great merging. The gates between worlds were folds, places where the weave had been bent, not torn. He believed that understanding the conjunction required more than study. It required alignment. A mind shaped by fear or ambition could not read the pattern. Only one shaped by quiet recognition could enter the field and perceive its continuity. For this reason, many of his writings on the subject are cryptic, structured as meditations. He does not tell the reader what to think. He invites the reader to adjust their pace. Even the language he uses shifts in these texts. Sentences grow longer, more cyclical. Repetition becomes a tool for deepening understanding rather than conveying new points. The structure mirrors the subject. The rhythm of the writing echoes the slow rhythm of the conjunction itself. In his later years, Avallac'h described the event as a kind of call, a signal from the deeper layers of the universe, inviting the worlds to become aware of one another. This awareness brought conflict, yes, but it also brought possibility. New alignments became possible. New forms of magic emerged. The elder blood itself, in his view, was one such emergence, not caused by the conjunction, but made visible through its resonance. Within the quieter halls of Aen Elle, where spells were tested through duration, Avallac'h maintained a practice defined by care and consequence. He did not speak often of morality. His writings do not propose systems of right and wrong. But scattered throughout his notes, reflections, and marginalia are glimpses of a steady, deliberate awareness, a scholar's attention not only to what could be done, but to what should be left untouched. Avallac'h's magical methodology rested on observation, alignment, and continuity. He sought clarity in pattern rather than intervention in outcome. When working with lineage, memory, or dimensional energy, he treated each subject as a point within a broader weave. His goal was to witness emergence with minimal distortion. This approach shaped his ethical stance. He regarded the subjects of his study as expressions of something larger than themselves, carriers of alignment. Consent appears in his work as an unspoken boundary. He rarely involved others in experiments without prior attunement, and when interaction was necessary, it followed a long period of preparation. Participants were chosen for resonance, individuals whose presence harmonized with the purpose of the work. Each collaboration followed a rhythm set by mutual readiness. His chambers were designed with retreat in mind. Any subject who wished to step away from a working could do so without explanation. Doors opened without counterspell. Wards deactivated upon request. The space respected withdrawal. Avallac'h believed that magic, to be true, must be entered freely. Coercion warped not only the result, but the structure of the inquiry itself. An unwilling presence disrupted the field, introduced dissonance that no diagram could stabilize. This principle extended into his use of prophetic material. When working with visions or inherited foresight, Avallac'h approached each image with restraint. He treated prophecy as reflection, a symbolic window into current alignment, not a fixed picture of the future. His interpretations avoided urgency. He emphasized timing, sequence, and the emotional state of the dreamer. His questions were open-ended, often left unanswered. He believed that meaning unfolded over time, and that forcing clarity too early broke the cycle of understanding. His restraint becomes most visible in his handling of elder blood research. Despite possessing the knowledge, means, and political leverage to direct breeding programs or manipulate lineages, he declined to do so. His work remained observational. He mapped possibility, not preference. He charted sequences but refrained from initiating unions. In the margins of his notes, he wrote of stillness as a form of respect, the willingness to let potential remain unrealized when timing or context did not support its unfolding. Avallac'h viewed magical power as inherently relational. It did not belong to the practitioner. It moved through them, shaped by environment, attention, and choice. In his journals, he compared magical manipulation to tending a garden, where overwatering, overpruning, or impatient harvesting could damage the deeper soil. Ethics, for him, was embedded in the method. A working that produced results through imbalance would carry that imbalance into everything it touched. He expressed this through architectural design. His laboratories avoided sharp angles or hard surfaces. Walls were curved, lined with growth rather than glyph. The air was calibrated for clarity. Light shifted with an emotional tone. These choices were structural. Each detail maintained a field of gentle coherence, allowing thought to move without friction and presence to remain unstrained. Even in theoretical writing, Avallac'h resisted exploitative frameworks. He rejected terms like extraction, manipulation, and control when discussing magical inheritance or cross-world energy. Instead, he used language rooted in care and listening, phrases such as tending, listening, softening, and alignment. He believed that the world responded most clearly when approached in kindness, and that the most lasting insights arose from attention without imposition. There were limits to this stance. Avallac'h documented the consequences of imbalanced work but did not intervene unless alignment required it. His ethics did not translate into law. They existed as quiet constraints within his own practice, lines drawn for internal coherence. In this way, he shaped his surroundings through example rather than instruction. Later scholars would debate his neutrality. Some claimed that his refusal to act more forcefully in moments of crisis allowed certain lineages to fray or vanish. Others believed his silence protected lives that might otherwise have been reduced to function. These debates continue, but the tone of his writings remains steady. He moved with care because he understood how easily carelessness echoed across generations. In his final writings on magical methodology, Avallac'h described alignment as a form of reverence. To work with magic, one must first understand that one is never working alone. Every diagram, every ritual, every decision exists within a web of lives, memories, and rhythms not fully visible. Ethics begins with this awareness, as orientation. To stand within the weave and choose the next step with clarity, without disruption. In the recorded thoughts of Avallac'h, Lara Dorren emerges as a convergence, the brief meeting of multiple rhythms across blood, prophecy, and time. Her life marked a phase in the cycle of elder blood where potential shifted from theory into visible alignment. In Avallac'h's view, she did not carry significance because of what she accomplished, but because of what passed through her, the pattern, clear for a moment, before it branched again into uncertainty. Avallac'h traced her emergence as an inevitable appearance within a larger weave. Her ancestry bore the marks of recursive convergence, threads that had drawn together across centuries, each carrying partial resonance of the elder blood's harmonic signature. These threads followed a long, slow spiral, guided by the deep logic of magical inheritance. Lara represented the first point where this spiral reached expression in a form capable of shaping more than herself. He described her as a window through which the shape of future convergence became perceptible. She was alignment in motion. Her presence synchronized the world around her. In the weeks and years that followed her birth, dream seers across distant realms began recording similar symbols. Certain spells began to behave differently near her, with heightened sensitivity. Prophetic verses once thought closed returned to active rhythm. These effects were subtle, but consistent. The world responded to her. Among the Aen Elle, many viewed this with unease. A force once confined to theory and observation now moved visibly within a single life. There were calls to protect her, to isolate her, to prepare a path that would guide her toward productive outcome. Avallac'h chose a different response. He watched. He listened. He allowed her to move through her life without orchestration. His role was not to shape her, but to observe what her presence revealed, in dreams, in political motion, in the drift of magical saturation across nearby regions. In his writings, Lara's name appears frequently, though never in personal terms. His tone remained quiet, focused, and measured. She was a phenomenon made visible. Through her, he charted how the elder blood responded to human perception, how prophecy reactivated in response to her lineage, and how magical structures adapted to her choices. These choices, especially her partnership with a human, sparked tension. Among the Aen Elle, there was concern that her role had been diluted, that her potential would be wasted in a world unprepared for its consequences. Avallac'h approached this outcome differently. He treated the union as variation. The pattern had widened. The elder blood had passed into new configurations. This shift brought uncertainty, but also opportunity. A new spiral had begun. His response to this shift was analytical rather than corrective. He constructed models that included human lineage, integrating traits, tendencies, and unknowns into his genealogical frameworks. The presence of unpredictability introduced new harmonics. In this widened scope, Lara remained central for the clarity of her alignment at a pivotal threshold. He observed that her role within prophecy shifted after her death. In earlier texts, She appeared as a key, a point of activation. Later verses treated her as a veil, something passed through, no longer fully present but still shaping outcomes. Avallac'h treated both roles as valid. He believed that prophetic meaning adapted to outcome. The prophecy, once it had passed through Lara, became something else, a continuation rather than a fulfillment. This understanding led him to reinterpret several core verses of Ithlinne's prophecy. Where others read finality, he read recursion. Where others saw doom, he found invitation. The catastrophe described in the verses was a realignment, a return to a harmonic baseline after a long period of drift. Lara's life had made the path visible. He began recording dreams centered on those who would carry the pattern after her. These dreams were not detailed. They carried images, echoes, symbols, strands to be followed rather than instructions to be obeyed. In his reflections, he emphasized that the future of the elder blood could not be predicted. It could only be aligned with, observed, and respected. Avallac'h's role in Lara's story remained consistent: interpreter, witness, and cartographer of the pattern she briefly brought into clarity. He held her life as one holds a lens, carefully, with steady hands, so that the shape passing through it might fall cleanly on the surface beyond. The question that followed Avallac'h's study of Lara Dorren was of structure. If the elder blood expressed itself through convergence, through recursive harmony within ancestral patterns, could that convergence be understood well enough to be echoed by design? He did not seek to create an heir, nor did he frame his inquiry in terms of replication. Instead, he posed a quieter question: could the harmonic qualities of elder blood be drawn forth without birth? This question did unfolded naturally from his genealogical diagrams, which had begun to resemble tonal compositions more than family trees. Branches joined not by name or date, but by resonance, rhythmic spacing, and intervals of magical saturation. The pattern, once glimpsed through lineage, suggested properties that might be represented through other means: symbols, sequences, spatial configurations. If the convergence was real, perhaps it could be simulated. Avallac'h began by identifying the most stable aspects of the elder blood's presence. These included its tendency to activate prophetic cycles, its influence on dream logic, and its capacity to distort the permeability between worlds. He catalogued these properties as effects, subtle atmospheric shifts that repeated across known bearers. With this archive, he began a series of experiments in symbolic resonance, attempts to recreate these effects through magical constructs designed to mirror the rhythm of inheritance. His first method involved harmonic lattices, crystalline structures embedded with layered incantations drawn from ancestral timelines. These lattices served as mirrors for the pattern, reflecting and refracting the magical field around them in ways that emulated the presence of the blood. When placed near dreamers or seers, these lattices often triggered visions. The content of those visions varied, but their structure remained consistent: recursions, crossroads, images of mirrored worlds, and duplicated memory. These outcomes did not prove that the blood was present, but they indicated that its signal could be approached through design. His second method explored geometric invocations, spatial arrangements of glyphs, minerals, and sound designed to echo the ratios found in convergent genealogies. These invocations took the form of rooms, sanctums, or temporary chambers whose structure replicated the mathematical relationships embedded in the elder blood's lineage. Individuals who entered these spaces without preparation often experienced moments of temporal drift, symbolic déjà vu, or the spontaneous recall of languages they had never studied. Avallac'h recorded these effects calmly, noting their consistency across subjects and the degree to which intention influenced duration. He described these rooms as mnemonic containers, because they summoned memory-shaped perception. The spaces altered awareness in ways that made certain thoughts easier to access, certain insights more likely to surface. This shift was gentle. Most visitors did not describe their experiences as magical. They spoke instead of clarity or recognition, or a subtle change in their sense of sequence. Over time, these experiments refined his understanding of inheritance itself. He began to consider whether magical traits were bound only to bloodlines or whether they could be encoded through symbolic correspondence. If elder blood was a signal rather than a substance, perhaps its harmonic field could emerge wherever the right conditions were present. This idea did not diminish the role of living bearers. On the contrary, it elevated them. It suggested that their presence was not isolated, but interconnected with larger forces. A bearer of the blood was a convergence point, a site where symbolic, genetic, and dimensional elements intersected to express something greater than the sum of its history. Avallac'h's attempts to synthesize this state never aimed to produce individuals. His focus remained on perception, the cultivation of spaces and structures capable of echoing the pattern closely enough to allow interaction. These echoes were fleeting. None of his artificial constructs maintained the resonance for long. But each successful interval offered a new detail, a chord, a symbol, a faint echo of the tone he had observed in Lara. There were limits he did not cross. He avoided blending living beings with artificial harmonic fields. The boundary between simulation and imposition remained clear in his methodology. To emulate a convergence was to understand it. To force it through flesh would violate its integrity. His ethics remained intact even as his knowledge deepened. Presence must arise naturally, or it was no longer the same presence at all. In the final years of this work, Avallac'h began mapping these artificial echoes alongside living genealogies, placing the symbolic constructs within the same charts as recorded lineages. This act reflected his belief that the two were part of the same field. A well-tuned lattice could sing the same note as a living air. To the Aen Elle, existence was never confined to a single world. Their memory carried the scent of other skies, the geometry of lands where light fell at unfamiliar angles, the hush of dimensions where time stepped differently. This awareness was inherited, passed through dream, architecture, and ritual. From their earliest records, the Aen Elle traced their lineage to a long arc of migration across realities. Theirs was a culture shaped by movement between worlds. Avallac'h approached this heritage with quiet precision. He did not frame it as conquest, nor as escape. He described it as alignment, the natural unfolding of a people attuned to the seams between realms. In his early work, he gathered the oral maps passed between Severn circles, songs that described the texture of other skies, glyphs that recorded crossings long forgotten by official memory. These fragments, once considered mythic, revealed a subtle coherence when arranged in sequence. They pointed to many small shifts, moments of relocation guided by resonance rather than design. He proposed that the Aen Elle had followed a path of harmonic suitability. Each world they settled corresponded to a phase in their development, culturally, magically, and dimensionally. Worlds with thicker magical fields nourished their early rites. Realms with gentler temporal flows allowed for long dreaming and reflection. When a world grew out of phase with their rhythm, they moved in observance of deeper tides. This philosophy shaped their conduct. The Aen Elle entered quietly, choosing locations of magical compatibility, forests that remembered speech, rivers that flowed along dream lines, valleys that echoed with ancestral tone. Settlements were designed with sensitivity to the host realm's structure. If a world responded with imbalance, they withdrew. This conduct was cultural memory, practiced through restraint, observed through continuity. Avallac'h extended this awareness into a comprehensive model. He constructed what came to be known as the spheric map, a layered system of resonance indicators, threshold patterns, and phase correspondences. Each entry recorded a realm's magical density, emotional rhythm, dimensional friction, and suitability for Aen Elle habitation. His notations were delicate. He did not label worlds as dangerous or hospitable. He described their tonal posture, whether they opened or resisted, whether they flowed or fractured upon entry. The map included over 37 worlds, though many appeared only briefly, visited during dream projection, entered through narrow veils, or glimpsed during rare fluctuations in cross-world flow. Among these, only a handful were marked as stable hosts. The rest held meaning as reference, indicators of how reality bends, how magic shifts, how consciousness adapts across boundaries. One of the most discussed entries remains the human world, the post-conjunction realm known to humans as the continent. In Avallac'h's map, this world is marked with layered annotations. Its magical density is noted as inconsistent. Its dream fields register high volatility, but its convergence points, especially those involving elder blood resonance, are unusually strong. He treated the world as a complex zone of emergence. Its instability made it unsuitable for long habitation, but ideal for observing the spiral of magical inheritance as it unfurled under unfamiliar pressure. This attitude distinguished Avallac'h from many within the Aen Elle court. Where others saw the human world as chaotic or diminished, he saw structure in motion, a field of anomalies that revealed patterns more clearly than any orderly realm could. He sought to study the conditions under which alignment occurred spontaneously. The world's unpredictability became a feature, not a flaw. He also observed how prolonged exposure to other worlds shaped the Aen Elle themselves. Each crossing brought change. Language shifted, rituals evolved, and even dreaming rhythms responded. These changes were subtle but enduring. Avallac'h regarded them as renewal, signs that the Aen Elle remained attuned to the flow of the weave, capable of evolving without severing their roots. His notes described these shifts with clarity. He recorded how memory stored differently in realms of slower time, how prophetic dreams required recalibration after returning from high-density worlds, and how magical symbols took on slightly altered meaning depending on the host realm's structural tone. These details mattered. They allowed the Aen Elle to maintain continuity without rigidity. This attentiveness shaped his counsel at court. When discussions arose around expansion or retreat, Avallac'h presented resonance charts, phase curves, and threshold stability maps. His advice centered on suitability. He believed that the world, like a living mind, offered signs when it was ready to be entered, and withheld access when it required distance. The Aen Elle, to survive with clarity, had to remain in dialogue with these signs. In this light, his role was never that of navigator. He was a translator, one who listened to the posture of realms and conveyed their meaning without distortion. His loyalty remained with his people, but his methods served balance. He did not seek to bind other worlds to the Aen Elle. He sought to preserve the conditions through which harmony could be restored, again and again, with each passing threshold. Within the mirror-lit halls of Ithlinne, where decision and prophecy walk side by side, power does not flow in a single direction. The Aen Elle court, shaped as much by perception as by rule, carries within it many voices, some calm, some commanding. Among them, two figures came to define a subtle divergence in approach: Avallac'h, the sage of resonance and memory, and Gwynbleidd, the commander of military certainty and inherited claim. Their positions within court were not equal, but neither were they opposed. Avallac'h held no formal office. His authority moved quietly, through vision and proximity, through interpretation rather than assertion. Gwynbleidd, by contrast, stood as one of the most visible agents of the royal will, a noble of martial bearing, deeply aligned with tradition, with loyalty rooted in continuity of leadership. Both were trusted. Both were listened to. But they spoke in different tempos, and over time, the distance between those rhythms grew. Avallac'h viewed the Aen Elle's survival as a matter of resonance, remaining attuned to shifting magical conditions, adjusting posture without losing core tone. Gwynbleidd saw survival through clarity, firm decisions, preserved order, the maintenance of lines. One moved through implication, the other through direction. Neither approach was flawed. But when prophecy began to take a central role in court affairs, the distance between them sharpened. The emergence of Lara Dorren introduced new questions. Her alignment with elder blood theory, Her departure from Aen Elle culture and her influence on cross-world resonance carried implications far beyond bloodline. Avallac'h, with his genealogical insight, presented her as a focal point of alignment, one whose actions echoed through dimensional architecture. Giles, with his sense of loyalty and command, viewed her choice as rupture, a breach of continuity, and a weakening of what should have been preserved. This divergence manifested through tone, through emphasis, through the quiet presence of hesitation during council. When Avallac'h spoke of future alignment, Giles responded with questions of duty. When the sage proposed waiting for patterns to emerge, the commander invoked urgency. Each sought to serve the Aen Elle. Each believed their vision preserved the greater good. But their methods unfolded along different axes. The royal family, situated between these perspectives, often acted as fulcrum. Monarchs listened to Avallac'h's long forecasts, weighed them against Giles' strategic certainty, and made decisions shaped by both. But over time, small decisions began to shift weight. Military readiness took priority over dream interpretation. Colonization of other spheres gained momentum. The sage diagrams were consulted less often. Avallac'h documented it. In his writings from this period, he notes the increasing pace of court cycles, the shortening of deliberation windows, the rising preference for definitive language. He observes them as one records the approach of a new season. His reflections carry neither bitterness nor acquiescence. They continue in the same measured tone, tracking how political posture echoes through magical alignment. The tension with Giles crystallized most clearly around the handling of Ciri, a bearer of elder blood whose presence revived the deepest patterns of convergence. Avallac'h viewed her not as a tool or a danger, but as an event, the recurrence of a tone long awaited. Giles, perceiving threat and opportunity in equal measure, sought containment, clarity, and use. Their responses reflected their philosophies. One sought to listen, the other sought to act. Avallac'h's influence never vanished. He remained a figure of regard, especially among those who valued continuity of vision and depth of foresight. His sanctums were visited, his maps referenced, his presence quietly requested during moments of alignment. But the structure of power moved toward immediacy. The sage's work required patience, and patience became rare. Despite this, he did not withdraw. His purpose had never been to control direction. It had always been to maintain the thread, the quiet awareness that beneath strategy and conflict, the deeper pattern continued to unfold. Even as court politics leaned toward assertion, his diagrams continued to map recurrence. Even as decisions moved swiftly, he preserved the slower rhythm, storing resonance, tending memory, listening beyond the moment. His relationship with Giles remained courteous. There are no records of confrontation, no transcripts of argument. Their tension existed in presence, in silence, in the space between approaches. Each knew the other's value. Each worked within their sphere. And though their paths rarely met in policy, they remained bound by the shared structure of Aen Elle continuity, one as guardian of rhythm, the other of form. To walk the land surrounding Ternalia is to enter a world that listens. Stones hum faintly beneath the moss. Winds shift in rhythm with thought. Trees curve toward unseen harmonics, their branches reaching toward lines older than settlement, older even than memory. Among the Aen Elle, such places were never claimed. They were honored. Each sacred site marked a convergence of flows, where magic, time, and intention touched. And where they touched, the world remembered. The Aen Elle mapped their lands through resonance. Their cartography followed alignment, noting places where dream patterns intensified, where vision came unbidden, where sound carried further than it should. These sites were found, slowly, through years of quiet observation. Some took generations to name. Others revealed themselves only after alignment returned, when stars moved back into place, or ancient songs were sung with the right breath. Avallac'h spent much of his life in motion among these sites. Though known most widely for his presence in court, his true work unfolded beyond its walls, in the stone-ringed clearings, beneath starlit domes, and along the banks of rivers that vanished and reappeared according to dream rhythm. He marked these places with presence. Each visit was a listening. Each return brought deeper understanding. One of the most significant of these locations was the Vale of Ithlinne, a narrow glen nestled between silver-barked trees, where time thinned in regular cycles. At specific intervals, the sound of birdsong would pause mid-note, and a stillness unlike sleep would settle across the land. In these moments, Avallac'h recorded shifts in magical density that allowed clearer access to ancestral dreamlines. He used the Vale as a harmonic basin, a place where layered frequencies of bloodline, prophecy, and place came together with rare stability. Another key site was the Temple of Fenhal, long abandoned by formal practice but preserved in subtle resonance. Its geometry was asymmetrical, a design Avallac'h believed reflected a preconjunction mode of dimensional navigation. The walls of the temple echoed with thought. Those who entered with intention found their inner questions amplified into vision. Avallac'h visited this site during periods of personal uncertainty to clarify alignment. He described it as a mirror without surface. There were also the ice groves beyond the northern reaches, trees that crystallized in seasonal pulses, forming mirrored tunnels of light. Beneath their canopy, magic pooled in loops, repeating certain emotional frequencies until they wore grooves in memory. Avallac'h conducted slow experiments here, tracking how prolonged exposure altered symbolic recall. Visitors who spent time beneath the groves reported dreams that played in reverse, or sequences of thought that circled until insight emerged from repetition. These sites were not isolated. Each formed part of a larger harmonic network, what Avallac'h called the ley array. This array communicated through tone. When one site activated, through ritual, convergence, or dream, others responded, often in mirrored rhythm. A chant sung at Ithlinne could echo in Fenhal. A glyph traced in the ice groves might glow faintly in a tower across the continent. This response was structural, like a bell ringing across glass. Avallac'h believed that these places preserved more than energy. They preserved rhythm, the long, slow cadence of the world before the conjunction. By returning to them, the Aen Elle could remember not only where they had come from, but how they had moved through time before disruption. He treated these sites as participants. Each had a tone. Each had a threshold. Each had a way of listening that shaped what could be learned. His studies focused on understanding when and how they chose to respond. He approached them with patience, returning at different phases of moon, season, and dreaming cycle. Sometimes nothing changed. Other times, subtle shifts in light or temperature marked the beginning of vision. He described these shifts as invitations, the site acknowledging presence and offering access. Avallac'h recorded these experiences in harmonic diagrams, layered compositions of color, angle, and frequency that conveyed state rather than information. These diagrams were stored in resonant crystal, playable only within aligned chambers. Their purpose was to recreate the moment of alignment for future practitioners, allowing them to enter the same field of listening, even if the physical site remained distant. He also constructed a number of temporary sanctums designed to mimic these sacred sites. They were tonal correspondences, structures built to reflect the same magical posture, allowing access to similar rhythms in times of travel or retreat. Some of these sanctums were located beneath Ternalia, others in remote locations reachable only by dreamwalk. Each followed the same principle: resonance before function, silence before speech. Through this work, Avallac'h preserved a relationship between land and knowledge that remains rare. He treated it as co-creator. The sacred sites of the Aen Elle were living systems, repositories of rhythm, mirrors of thought, and keepers of long, slow knowledge. His reverence for them shaped every diagram, every journey, every choice. Among the Aen Elle, prophecy is not confined to the future. It speaks across time, emerging from blood, dream, and ritual. Those gifted with vision are called Tidwin, meaning those who hold twilight. They do not see what will happen. They perceive what moves beneath happening, the structures of change, the subtle tides that rise before the world shifts. To guide such seers is no light task. Their gifts are fragile, easily bent by praise or fear. What they reveal depends as much on their state as on their gift. Avallac'h stepped into this role slowly, as one steps into a room already listening. Younger Tidwin were drawn to him by gravity. His stillness offered them clarity. His presence quieted interference. In his company, the noise of ambition faded, and their visions began to settle into form. They came to understand the shape of what they carried. He received these visits without ceremony. His sanctums were open, his posture patient. He asked few questions. He listened, not only to words, but to the cadence of speech, to the rhythm between images, to the parts of a vision repeated without reason. He believed that the meaning of a dream did not lie in its symbols, but in its recurrence, the way it pressed upon the mind again and again, adjusting itself until readiness was found. When he spoke, it was seldom to explain. His responses took the form of mirrors, reflections designed to help the seer recognize alignment. What did the breath feel like before the fire appeared? He might ask, or did the sky change after you looked away? They were invitations, ways of helping the dreamer re-enter their vision with new attention. This method shaped the dreaming circles that grew around him. Informal gatherings of young seers who recorded their visions together, compared them in silence, and learned to discern when overlap meant convergence or coincidence. Avallac'h guided these circles gently, ensuring that no dream was elevated above the others, and no voice drowned in interpretation. His role was to maintain rhythm. In moments of deeper alignment, when multiple dreamers began to see variations of the same event, he would begin recording how they described it. He documented their emotional tone, the timing of images, and the shifts in phrasing across retellings. These records formed the foundation of his long-range pattern diagrams, charts that tracked not prophecy, but its rhythm across time and blood. These diagrams were consulted by invitation. Members of the royal court, when faced with decisions steeped in uncertainty, would request access. Avallac'h offered guidance without conclusion. He pointed toward symbols repeating in court events, echoed in dreams, or mirrored in ritual cycles. His influence shaped decisions through quiet orientation. Policies shifted when they came into phase with the pattern. This alignment extended into ritual. Avallac'h oversaw a number of high convergence observances, moments when prophecy, lineage, and sight came together. These rites were designed not to alter fate, but to clarify it. They involved walking ancient paths at specific times, reading aloud from mirrored tablets, or placing symbols along ley-marked pools. Each act was a gesture of attunement. Those who participated often emerged with a softened urgency, not because their questions had been answered, but because they had been brought into rhythm with the structure beneath the question. He emphasized that vision was never absolute. Even the clearest dream bore the imprint of the seer's condition, their hunger, their joy, their fears. A prophecy could become distorted by the very desire to understand it. Avallac'h's greatest contribution as mentor was his refusal to crystallize meaning too soon. He allowed vision to remain fluid long enough for its true shape to emerge without force. In rare instances, he would intervene. If a seer became overwhelmed, caught in recursive dreaming, or unable to distinguish vision from waking, Avallac'h would lead them into one of the harmonic sanctums he had constructed across the land. There, surrounded by stillness calibrated to restore balance, the dreamer could release their vision without loss. These sanctums were spaces of return, designed to bring the self back into phase. Among those who studied under him, a quiet lineage of practice emerged. These dreamers went on to guide others. Their influence was subtle, embedded in the pacing of speech, the structure of questions, the willingness to wait. Within the quiet arc of Avallac'h's contemplations, the difference between the Aen and the Aen Elle was never framed as rivalry. He traced their divergence like a river that split into two streams, each moving through different terrain, each shaped by the cadence of the land it entered. To understand their separation was to recognize how memory, rhythm, and intention shape the long unfolding of a people. The Aen Elle, in his view, remained tethered to the deeper harmonics of preconjunction continuity. Their migration across spheres had preserved certain layers of attunement, the way time moved through architecture, the role of ritual in daily motion, the expectation that magic should follow silence. The Aen Elle, dwelling within the human world, adapted instead to compression, a world of shorter cycles, sharper turns, and fading resonance. Their gifts remained, but their posture changed. Avallac'h observed that the Aen Elle retained memory, but not structure. Their rituals became stories. Their dreaming grew erratic. Prophecy arrived in fragments, no longer embedded in song, but flaring unpredictably across bloodlines. This shift marked transformation. He wrote that their magic had become more immediate, more reactive, a kind of brilliance that flared up in moments of crisis. But it lost its depth of root. He traced this transformation through language. The evolution of elder speech among the Saedhir showed signs of urgency, phrases shortened, inflection simplified, tonal markers reduced. Their words moved faster, with less room for echo. He believed this reflected the conditions of their world, a sphere marked by instability, where memory must adapt quickly or be lost. The Saedhir had rearranged the way they remembered. This rearrangement extended into time. Aen Elle culture measured time in cycles, recurrence, and convergence. The Saedhir, under human influence, adopted linear sequence, before and after, cause and effect. Avallac'h noted that this temporal shift altered not only how they lived, but how they dreamed. Seers among the Saedhir began to describe visions with beginnings and endings, rather than spirals. Their prophecies became stories, with structure and tension. This made them easier to share, but harder to align with the deeper flow. Magic itself responded. Avallac'h observed that spells cast by Aen Elle mags often carried sharper edges, more power in the moment, but less stability over time. Their enchantments shimmered brightly, but did not settle into the environment. The Aen Elle, by contrast, preferred spells that unfolded slowly, taking shape across days or seasons, designed to harmonize with existing rhythm rather than impose new form. The Saedhir reached. The Elle listened. He expressed concern not for the Saedhir's power, but for their context. They were brilliant within a world that did not support their depth. The fading of magical nodes on the continent, the weakening of ancient lines, and the rising dominance of human material logic placed continual pressure on their practices. Avallac'h did not blame the Saedhir for adapting. He recognized the necessity, but he worried that in doing so, they would lose their ability to recall the longer rhythm, the one that required stillness. Despite this, he spoke with quiet admiration of individual Saedhir who managed to preserve fragments of deeper resonance. He studied their spells, mapped their dream fragments, and occasionally noted unexpected moments of convergence. In some rare cases, he observed Saedhir-born mags whose bloodlines still carried the tonal signature of preconjunction harmonics. These individuals, often unaware of their inheritance, produced effects that mirrored elder blood presence, though briefly and without repetition. He believed these flashes were signs that the deeper rhythm had not vanished, only thinned. The spiral still moved, even when the echo was faint. His work sought to track these movements without interfering, watching for signs of recurrence, noting where the spiral re-entered the world through unguarded paths. Avallac'h never framed the Aen Elle as fallen. He described them as accelerated, a people who had entered the stream of urgency and found ways to remain luminous within it. Their challenges were many, but so were their capacities. In his final reflections on the divide, he wrote that the two elven kin lines remained bound by origin. The Elle held continuity. The Saidher held adaptability. Between them lay a space of possibility, a field where, if convergence were to occur again, something new might emerge, a reweaving. Time, for Avallac'h, was never simply the medium in which life occurred. It was a structure that shaped perception, memory, and the long evolution of magical consciousness. From his earliest writings, he treated time as a rhythm, one that could be slowed, echoed, or stepped outside of, depending on attention and alignment. Yet for all his precision in manipulating temporal conditions, he never claimed mastery over it. He approached time as one might approach a deep river, by learning how to move with its current. Mortality, within this current, was defined by rhythm, the length of a cycle, the pace of unfolding. Among the Aen Elle, life extended far beyond the span known to humans, yet even their years held limits. Avallac'h lived with the awareness that magical races, though long-lived, were still shaped by decay, not always visible, not always sudden, but always present. The post-conjunction world had introduced disruptions. Places once rich in magic had grown thin. Practices once intuitive now required effort. Time, once a spacious flow, began to narrow. In his personal journals, kept apart from his court records and prophetic diagrams, he reflected often on the sensation of slowing. Days grew heavier. Memory repeated itself in unfamiliar ways. Dreams once fluid began to repeat symbols without clarity. These shifts were signs that the rhythm around him had changed. The world, he wrote, had entered a phase of compression. This compression manifested not only in time, but in the very experience of presence. Where once the days opened wide for contemplation, now they demanded selection. Each hour required intention. Each gesture carried more weight. Avallac'h adapted by doing less. As the flow tightened, clarity required silence. To rush was to fracture alignment. He responded by simplifying his work, focusing only on what moved in harmony with the deeper pulse. His reflections on death followed the same tone. He treated it as a transition, the reabsorption of individual tone into the greater field. He believed that memory did not vanish, but returned to the harmonic structure from which it arose. The echo remained. In certain sacred sites, he claimed to hear fragments of thought that did not belong to any living voice. They were tonal memories, intervals of consciousness preserved where time still moved with clarity. He also observed how magical beings experienced time differently as their environment changed. In realms with rich magical density, perception expanded. Moments unfolded slowly, and presence deepened. But in places where magic thinned, time accelerated. Awareness fragmented. Even long-lived elves felt rushed, pressured, scattered across hours. Avallac'h noted this with concern. He believed that the loss of magical atmosphere shortened not only life, but thought. Decisions became reactive. Vision narrowed. This narrowing led to misalignment. He described it as a kind of spiritual erosion. Without time for memory to settle, identity began to fray. Ritual lost meaning. Prophecy lost sequence. For this reason, he urged that magical races not measure their survival by lifespan alone. They must measure it by clarity, the ability to remain aligned with the deeper rhythm, even as time pressed in. Despite these concerns, he remained steady. Avallac'h's approach to aging was marked by grace. He adjusted his pace in respect for the changing structure of the world. He reduced his counsel at court, retreated more frequently into harmonic sanctums, and spent longer periods in silent observation. He wrote that in times of temporal pressure, the most valuable act is to preserve space, to hold quiet where urgency has begun to dominate. His thoughts on reincarnation, though rare, suggest a belief in tonal return. He did not imagine a soul moving from one body to another. He envisioned resonance reappearing, the same harmonic sequence arising in different form, at a different moment in the spiral. A bearer of elder blood might not return as a direct heir, but as a tone, carried in the cadence of someone else's dreams, or in the shape of a spell cast without explanation. Even in the presence of decay, he wrote of entropy as rearrangement, the return of complexity into seed form, waiting for the next rhythm to begin. His final reflections carry stillness, a readiness to witness what comes next, without grasping, a trust that the pattern continues, even when its shape has changed beyond recognition. For Avallac'h, language was a structure of resonance, a vessel through which memory, magical logic, and world-shaping intention moved with quiet persistence. He treated ancient tongues as living sequences, each with its own rhythm, weight, and magical potential. Words carried more than meaning. They carried tone, and through tone, alignment. To speak the language of the ancients was to enter the field of their thought, to participate in the shape of how they perceived the world. His earliest linguistic work began with the elder speech, known among the Aen Elle as a common tongue, yet possessing depths few had explored fully. He approached it as one might approach a harmonic diagram, mapping the shifts in vowel tone, tracing the recurrence of soft consonants in incantations, noting how sentence structure mirrored magical processes. In his notes, he observed that the most potent phrases in spellcraft often followed the same rhythmic cadence found in ancestral naming rites. This overlap, he believed, was no accident. It revealed that language and ritual emerged from the same tonal origin. From elder speech, his work expanded into preconjunction dialects, tongues preserved only in fragments, scattered across ruins and dream sequences passed down among the Severn. These fragments, though incomplete, revealed a kind of linguistic scaffolding, older forms that supported the newer speech, like roots beneath soil. Avallac'h reconstructed these roots through tone matching and symbolic overlap, listening for where meaning clustered even when syntax fell away. He treated these forgotten languages as echoes, faded, yes, but still capable of aligning with the present when approached without haste. He constructed codices as tonal maps. Each entry contained not only definition, but harmonic signature, ritual use, and alignment tendencies. For example, the word shadel, often translated as veil, was accompanied by a diagram showing its resonance across dream states, its recurrence in vision sequences involving dimensional thresholds, and its use in lullabies designed to soften perception. Some codices were etched into crystal, designed to be played rather than read. The user would run a finger across its surface and hear a pattern, a subtle rhythm intended to restore the conceptual field in which the word originally lived. These objects required preparation. They could only be used within aligned chambers, during specific cycles. Avallac'h believed that language, when engaged correctly, shaped the very rhythm of thought. His study extended to incantations preserved in pre-Aen Elle rites. These spells were not designed for power. They functioned as tuning devices, soft sequences of speech used to align body, breath, and environment. In reconstructing them, Avallac'h noted that many were composed of mirrored syllables, looped across 4 or 6 intervals. When spoken in proper rhythm, they altered the field of silence, allowing one to sense nearby magical structures without engaging them directly. He wrote that such language was not designed to describe the world, but to accompany it. The difference, he emphasized, was essential. To speak an ancient incantation properly was to become momentarily indistinct from the forces it referenced. This view shaped his teaching. He discouraged rote memorization. Instead, he taught seers and apprentices to listen, to sit beside stones carved with ancient glyphs, to speak phrases aloud only after the surrounding space had softened. Language, he said, must be invited. It could not be summoned. His most advanced work in linguistic structure explored what he called preconceptual phrasing, sequences of speech designed to convey alignment rather than content. These were not spells, nor were they poems. They were utterances formed from resonance, intended to move thought into a quieter configuration. Many of these phrases appear in his private journals, often unaccompanied by explanation. Liven tor aid her, one reads, a line repeated 3 times, each written with slightly different glyph spacing. It does not translate easily, but its recurrence in dream diagrams suggests it served as a harmonic anchor during periods of vision instability. Avallac'h viewed linguistic decay as a form of magical erosion. As certain phrases fell out of use, the structures they once stabilized began to dissolve. He saw it as transition, the slow reshaping of thought to match a world now drifting in new rhythm. But he also believed in preservation. His codices, hidden in sanctums and mirrored alcoves, preserved tonal structures that might one day return when the pattern curved back into phase. In Avallac'h's world, architecture was shaped to listen. His sanctums, towers, and ritual spaces carried no ornament for its own sake. Their beauty emerged from proportion, from orientation, from silence held in stone. Every curve, every threshold, every column was placed to receive the rhythm already present, to invite magic in without disturbance. Avallac'h believed that space could be taught to resonate. Just as a dreamer learns to quiet the mind before vision enters, a room could be taught to hold stillness, to soften interference, sharpen memory, and align the motion of time. His designs were founded on this principle. A sanctum was a structure that allowed magic to reveal itself. He began each design by walking the land. Before sketching a single line, he moved slowly through the terrain, noting where birds paused their flight, where wind shifted direction, where shadow fell without cause. These signs told him what the land remembered. Only then would he begin to chart harmonic maps, diagrams of resonance flow, emotional weight, and magical saturation. The placement of a door mattered more than its material. A misaligned entry could distort the rhythm of a room. Windows were rarely square. Their angles followed celestial curves, designed to admit light during specific conjunctions, or to cast shadow in the shape of glyphs long forgotten by ordinary speech. Floors were tuned, sequences of stone arranged to conduct frequency from footstep to foundation. In some sanctums, a whisper spoken near the center could be felt as pressure at the edge. He preferred natural material, stone that had already held moonlight, wood that bent to wind rather than broke, crystals grown in still water. These materials carried the rhythm of their origin, and when brought together in the right proportion, they created what Avallac'h called a listening field, a space capable of echoing magical thought without distortion. One such space was the Levran Chamber, a circular room beneath the northern cliffs, entered only during low tide when a narrow path of saltstone revealed itself. Inside, the walls curved inward slightly, catching voice and thought alike. Avallac'h used the chamber to map dream sequences. Seers who entered would speak without prompting, their visions emerging with clarity not found elsewhere. He recorded the pulse in the room when they spoke, the way light shifted, the way silence bent. Another structure, the Sarvale Gallery, stretched along a high ridgeline exposed only during winter. Its walls were woven from mirrored root and bone-white marble, designed to reflect intention. Those who walked its length would find their thoughts mirrored back at them. Avallac'h used the gallery for calibration, inviting young practitioners to walk its path in silence, observing which thoughts returned and which dissolved before reflection could form. The sanctums were not secret, but neither were they open. They were accessible to those whose rhythm matched the space. Many who attempted entry found themselves unable to cross the threshold through subtle misalignment. The air thickened. Steps slowed. Thought became heavy. These signs were understood as invitation to return later, not as denial. When one was ready, the door opened without effort. He maintained no central tower of prestige. His spaces were distributed, each tied to a different alignment. One for dreaming, one for time distortion, one for linguistic preservation, one for harmonic repair. The location of each was chosen through long study, and the process of construction often took years. It had to unfold at the pace of the land. Rushing a sanctum led to collapse. Even within Aen Elle, he altered the rooms he was given. Curtains replaced with soft boughs, tables reoriented to catch moonlight, walls gently curved through layering of runic silt. Those who visited noticed the change immediately. The air was different. Silence became more comfortable than reply. Avallac'h once wrote that magic could only breathe where space was prepared. His architecture did not aim to contain power. It aimed to honor it, to create places where the tone of the world could rise, briefly, into clarity. These places were his true legacy, more than any diagram or tome. They endure still, untouched by time, waiting for footsteps that carry the right cadence. Dreams, for the Aen Elle, were never regarded as illusion or subconscious wandering. They were treated as doors, thresholds through which the self could move beyond ordinary rhythm and encounter structures otherwise inaccessible. Within this tradition, Avallac'h became one of the most attuned practitioners of what was called senilivelion, the quiet art of dreaming as alignment. It was not dream-walking as humans imagined it, with images flowing randomly across sleep. It was a discipline, a listening posture, and a way of observing the weave of worlds through the soft lens of inner motion. Avallac'h used dreams to enter its deeper shapes. Through careful projection, he studied points of convergence across spheres, observed fluctuations in magical density, and traced sequences of symbolic memory unfolding along elder blood lineages. But this was never done with force. His dreaming moved with precision, guided not by intention alone, but by consent, both of the field he entered and of the rhythm he followed. He approached dreaming as a kind of language, structured through tone, imagery, and the interplay of memory and presence. The dreamer, in his view, was the vessel through which patterns revealed themselves. To project meaning onto a dream too quickly was to fracture its unfolding. Instead, one had to become still enough to let the meaning cohere on its own, like mist settling into form. His technique involved preparation. The night before a projected dream, he would slow his breath across cycles, ingest soft tonics derived from lunar-gleaned herbs, and enter chambers designed to hold silence rather than sleep. These chambers, built from porous stone and veined crystal, were tuned to amplify dream resonance without distorting it. Light was minimal, warmth ambient, and every surface curved to avoid sudden reflection. The goal was to remove friction, to let thought slide into the field of dreaming without interruption. Once entered, the dream began with mood, a slow rise in emotional resonance, often without form. Only after this mood stabilized would the vision arrive, and even then, it moved without narrative. Avallac'h described the early phase as tonal drift, moments when thought, image, and self hovered in proximity but had not yet aligned. To remain present in this phase without forcing coherence was, he believed, the mark of a disciplined practitioner. Over time, he learned to project his awareness across spheres through these dreams. In realms attuned to his rhythm, this presence was felt as a gentle gravity. Plants leaning slightly without wind, animals pausing mid-step, seers dreaming the same glyph without having spoken. These projections served several purposes. One was observation, the mapping of convergence points in worlds he could not access physically. Another was memory traversal, locating ancestral echoes embedded in bloodline sequences, especially those connected to Lara Dorren and her descendants. He watched, noted, and departed, often returning with symbolic sequences later translated into harmonic diagrams or dream scripts. He also used projection as a form of non-verbal communication. Among certain Severn circles, where spoken language risked altering the rhythm of shared vision, he would send emotional patterns or symbolic impressions to guide inquiry. These communications were gentle nudges, the subtle pressure of thought placed in the right location, at the right time, to open a door. Those who received them often could not say what he had told them. They simply arrived at new understanding without knowing why. One of his more intricate uses of dreaming was what he termed thought lacing, the act of layering dream fields with parallel intent. In practical terms, This allowed multiple seers to access the same dream structure simultaneously, even across distance. This was not shared dreaming in the casual sense. It was coordinated resonance, a careful attunement process in which several minds entered the same symbolic rhythm and allowed it to speak through them. Avallac'h used this method during periods of prophetic uncertainty, especially when tracking unstable bloodline branches. By placing 3 or more dreamers into a unified rhythm, he could detect whether a pattern was strengthening, dispersing, or reconfiguring. He warned, however, that such practices carried risk. If one dreamer's tone disrupted, the entire structure could collapse into chaos, producing nightmares, recursive loops, or false visions. For this reason, only those who had spent years in preparatory practice were allowed to participate. Trust was essential in the sense of shared silence. In his later writings, Avallac'h expressed concern that as the world's magical rhythm faded, dreaming itself was changing. He observed more fragmentation in the visions of young seers, more noise, more urgency, more intrusion from waking fears. The clarity he once found in projection became harder to sustain. He adjusted his expectations. Dreams were no longer windows. They became weather, shifting, harder to read, yet still speaking in their own rhythm. To preserve the dreaming art, he recorded sequences of mood. These records, housed in crystal-tuned libraries hidden beneath several sanctums, contain long, flowing descriptions of emotional progression within dreams. No interpretation accompanies them. Avallac'h believed that future practitioners, if the time came, would find their way back through resonance, by reading the mood, breathing into it, and allowing the dream to return. His final entries describe dreams without vision, pure tone, humming in layers beyond shape. He called these threshold states. They marked the edge of known dreaming, the place where thought dissolved into field. There are artifacts in the annals of Aen Elle magic whose creation is less a matter of craft and more an act of attunement. Among them, the mirror of Tor Ziriel stands apart. Not because of its beauty, though it gleamed with a soft, inner silver no smith had forged, but because of what it reflected. Unlike ordinary scrying devices, it offered orientation. A kind of truth visible only to those who knew what rhythm they sought. Tor Ziriel, the Tower of the Swallow, had long been known as a site of convergence, one of the few remaining points where dimensional resonance touched the weave of worlds without distortion. Avallac'h spent decades studying its architecture and the subtle alterations in magical field that passed through it during threshold alignments. It was an interface, a place where presence could pass into other spheres without rupture. The mirror was born from this study. He crafted it to witness emergence. Its construction required no hammers, no forge, no chanting of names. It was composed of glass fused from sands collected during convergence, mixed with the breath of seers in deep dreaming states, and cooled by silence, a silence held for 3 lunar cycles in a chamber where time moved fractionally slower than the world outside. These steps were not symbolic. Each was designed to embed a state of listening into the mirror's surface. Once completed, it was placed in a side chamber beneath the tower, a room carved into the foundation stone, where no voice echoed and no light entered unless called. There, the mirror rested, suspended slightly above the ground, untethered yet unmoving. Its surface shimmered faintly from internal motion, a soft folding of presence that changed according to who stood before it. It was not a mirror in the ordinary sense. One could not see their face in it. What appeared was more abstract, sequences of tone, symbolic images drawn from memory, fragments of dream or thought too faint to name. Avallac'h described it as a translator of alignment. When Ciri, bearer of elder blood, born of an unexpected branch in the spiral, stood before it, the mirror showed the field her presence shaped, currents moving around her, convergences forming in response to her path, and signs of cross-world motion that echoed her choices before they were made. The mirror was not used often. It was too sensitive for casual inquiry. To bring confusion or strong emotion into its presence was to cloud its tone. For this reason, Avallac'h allowed very few to see it, and fewer still to approach it alone. Those who did often emerged silent. Its symbolic significance extended beyond its function. Among the Aen Elle, mirrors were understood as thresholds. In ancient speech, the word for mirror, caladreth, also carried meanings of reflection, return, and balance. A well-crafted mirror did not reveal what was hidden. It harmonized what was present. The mirror of Tor Ziriel carried this principle to its highest expression. It aligned the observer with their field, allowing them to see the shape of their influence without judgment. Avallac'h wrote that mirrors such as this were not meant to be spoken of directly. Their meaning could not be described, only approached. He recorded the tonal atmosphere of the chamber, the subtle way the mirror changed in response to shifts in planetary rhythm, and the feeling of presence that gathered within it during certain prophecies. But he never claimed to understand all of it. The mirror, he believed, was partly alive. It belonged to a deeper pattern. In later years, the mirror became a point of quiet reverence. When the rhythm of the elder blood re-emerged, and cross-world thresholds began to tremble again, Avallac'h returned to the chamber more often. The mirror responded less visibly. Its surface grew quieter. But he noted that this quiet held weight. Something was preparing to shift. Some have speculated that the mirror was created to track Ciri alone, to monitor her passage, to control or contain. But this misunderstands Avallac'h's intent. He did not build the mirror for surveillance. He built it as a point of resonance. Ciri's presence activated it because her tone aligned with its purpose. In essence, the mirror of Tor Ziriel was a listening field cast into form, a presence that held its posture, waiting for alignment. There are few verses in elven history as enduring, or as distorted, as the words spoken by Ithlinne Epivenian. Hers was not the first voice to echo with prophecy, but it became the one that lingered. Her vision of ice, flame, and a child born of elder blood shaped the dreams of generations. Among the Aen Seidhe, it was spoken with reverence and dread. Among the Aen Elle, it became a point of divergence in interpretation. For Avallac'h, it was neither omen nor command. It was a map drawn in rhythm rather than certainty. He studied Ithlinne's words as layered music, each verse repeating with slight variation across time, its tone shifting as the world's alignment changed. In his earliest commentaries, he noted that no two dreamers heard the prophecy the same way. Even the most faithful recitations differed in emotional cadence, in phrasing, in the moment where silence fell between lines. This variance, to him, was the very heart of the prophecy's structure. It adapted to context. It responded to need. Avallac'h gathered over 36 iterations of the prophecy from Severn seers, temple inscriptions, oral recollections, and dream fragments preserved in crystal. He did not seek to establish a correct version. Instead, he charted their relationships, tracing how each variation reflected the magical conditions of the time in which it surfaced. A verse that emphasized ruin often arose during periods of political instability. A version that spoke of rebirth surfaced when dream fields became unusually clear. He treated these shifts as the prophecy's own rhythm adjusting to the weave. In private, Avallac'h referred to Ithlinne's words as a living schematic. It outlined potential, not destination. It moved in spirals, not lines. He wrote that to interpret it too literally was to force meaning where alignment had not yet formed. Its function was not to predict, but to tune. Those who came into contact with it, especially bearers of elder blood, often found themselves drawn into roles they did not fully understand, because the structure of the world began to bend around their presence. When Ciri came into focus, her lineage clear, her rhythm unmistakable, the prophecy stirred again. Verses once dormant returned to memory. Symbols long thought closed began reappearing in the dreams of unrelated seers. Avallac'h returned to his diagrams, adjusted several lines, and began listening again. His guidance to the Aen Elle court during this period was cautious. While others debated what should be done, how to use the child, how to prevent or fulfill the prophecy, Avallac'h maintained his distance. He warned that acting on it too soon would distort the very alignment they hoped to preserve. He approached Ciri as a resonance long awaited. She embodied the tone Ithlinne had glimpsed, not because she fulfilled the prophecy, but because she carried its rhythm. Her presence changed the atmosphere. Ley lines pulsed more actively in her vicinity. Portals stabilized or flickered in response to her passage. But none of this, in Avallac'h's view, meant that her role was fixed. He believed the prophecy had been misunderstood in one crucial way. It described a point of possibility, a threshold. Whether the world passed through that threshold, and in what shape it emerged on the other side, depended on many factors. Ciri's choices, the world's readiness, the posture of those who observed her. In his later writings, Avallac'h began referring to the prophecy as an echelon, an old word meaning both mirror and path not yet walked. He emphasized that the power of such a structure lay not in what it revealed, but in how one approached it. To treat it as command was to become blind. To treat it as reflection was to begin to see. He also observed that the prophecy had begun to change. New verses appeared. A line once thought to signal the world's end was now followed by a phrase hinting at renewal. These changes were signs that the spiral had turned again, that what had once seemed inevitable now opened into something new. Avallac'h believed it emerged from the field itself, shaped by presence, by resistance, by Ciri's refusal to be held within the roles projected onto her. Her divergence, rather than breaking the prophecy, had retuned it. In this, he found quiet confirmation that the schematic was never rigid. It breathed. Within the great vaults of Aen Elle and the smaller, quieter sanctums scattered throughout the Aen Elle realm, there are volumes whose bindings have never cracked under the pressure of careless hands. Scrolls stored in mirrored alcoves. Tablets wrapped in softened ash silk. Crystal cartridges that hum faintly when approached, warning even the curious to keep distance. They were preserved by silence, known to few, accessed by fewer still. And among them, the most sensitive bore the unmistakable touch of Avallac'h. He never described them as forbidden. He called them Tirevelian, shadow-kept, or veiled from the rhythm of the present. These were records whose content required a field of understanding not yet restored in the current world. To share them prematurely would distort their purpose. It would fracture their tone. Most of these tomes dealt not with spells or rituals, but with cosmological structure. They traced the motion of spheres before the conjunction, when the worlds were separate, and moved in gentle counterpoint rather than chaotic friction. These texts did not offer theories, they recorded memory. Together, they mapped how dimensions once sang together, how their alignments produced stability or rupture. Avallac'h believed these preconjunction harmonics were not lost, merely hidden beneath the noise introduced by dimensional collision. The tomes offered instructions not for reversing the conjunction, but for hearing through it, for locating the original tone beneath distortion. Many of the diagrams could only be read when viewed under specific frequency light, or within chambers calibrated to certain emotional states. The content was as much about how it was accessed as what it revealed. One scroll, wrapped in layers of nullwood bark and stored beneath the ice groves, detailed the process by which certain Ithlinne learned to project themselves into realms not yet formed, places existing only as potential within the great field of possibility. These journeys required months of preparation, isolation, and the deliberate unbinding of personal memory. The scroll did not describe what was found. It described what was required to return. Another crystal volume, sealed within a floating cube of layered ether glass, contained what Avallac'h referred to as the 11 tensions of voice. These were tonal sequences spoken not in any known tongue, but in structured breath, patterns that activated dormant resonance within ancient sites, or caused nearby spells to unravel themselves gently. He documented them for preservation. Their function, he believed, belonged to a future phase in the spiral, when such tones could be held without consequence. Some of the hidden tomes addressed more speculative themes. One volume, partially redacted even by Avallac'h himself, hinted at the possibility of layered realities, not parallel, but recursive. Realms in which the same pattern repeated, slightly altered, forming a chain of echo worlds that influenced each other across dream, ritual, and blood. He noted that bearers of elder blood occasionally displayed flickers of memory from these other strands, dreams that did not match any known history, yet carried unmistakable emotional weight. Avallac'h did not seek to control these possibilities. His response was always the same: record, observe, preserve. He believed that knowledge should not be wielded outside of alignment. Power without rhythm became distortion. Even among the Aen Elle, whose understanding of magic surpassed all others, he remained cautious. There were tones not yet meant to be heard. To prevent misuse, he embedded subtle resistances within these texts. Some required harmonic keys, short sequences of motion, breath, or intention, performed within precise spatial arrangements. Others responded only to certain bloodline tones, activating briefly in the presence of aligned resonance. A few remained unreadable entirely, storing their content in temporal folds that would only open when specific conditions across multiple worlds were met. They were safeguards against misalignment. To approach these records without readiness was disorienting. One might read a passage and find their dreams repeating phrases they did not understand, or walk through a familiar place and see it mirrored with slight, unsettling alteration. In the rare occasions when others requested access, Avallac'h never refused outright. He asked questions. He listened. He gauged whether the seeker's rhythm matched the tone of the record. If it did not, he invited them to return later. Some never did. Others returned years later, changed, and were then permitted to see. There is no evidence he ever used the most obscure records for his own gain. Their purpose, in his eyes, was conservation of possibility. They held structures the world had forgotten how to carry. In preserving them, he was preserving capacity, the quiet potential for a future moment when the spiral turned again and the world could once more hear clearly. To understand Avallac'h's view of humanity is to step into a long gaze. He did not speak of humans with hatred. He observed them with distance, the kind born from patience, not pride. Where others among the Aen Elle dismissed mankind as crude and chaotic, Avallac'h studied them as a phenomenon of rhythm, a people out of phase with the deeper weave, yet full of force and friction that reshaped the fields around them. He recorded their emergence as a kind of magical event, unbalanced, unstable, and yet deeply consequential. He noted early on that humans moved faster than their world could accommodate. Their civilizations rose in sharp pulses, each building upon the remnants of the last, never fully absorbing what came before. This acceleration, while productive in material terms, came at a cost. Avallac'h charted how human magic, once gifted through fragments of Severn teaching or chance inheritance, began to thin as it spread. Spells shortened. Theory gave way to application. Rites were broken into pieces, taught without context. The field became loud. Among his more measured writings, he described the human relationship to time as fragmented. They moved in sequence, but not in cycle. They carried forward without recalibration. This created the illusion of progress, but left no space for reflection. Avallac'h saw in this a deep vulnerability. Without rhythm, they could not hear warning. Without memory structured in harmony, they repeated collapse, not from ignorance, but from velocity. He traced this pattern in magical sites once used by the elves, locations where human mags had built their towers, conducted their experiments, and left behind warped currents. These places were exhausted, resonance stripped, ley lines bent by repetition of spells that demanded more than the land could yield. Some of these sites wept light. Others pulsed with erratic warmth. All carried the echo of disruption. Yet even as he charted these effects, Avallac'h believed that what had passed into dissonance must be allowed to settle. To press against it was to prolong the distortion. Instead he withdrew, not in contempt, but in acknowledgement. The human world had chosen its motion. It would unfold according to its own alignment, and, eventually, reach its natural still point. He recorded signs that this still point had already begun to surface. The fading of strong dreamers among humans. The collapse of schools founded on incomplete theory. The rise of magical tools that functioned without understanding. He saw these as symptoms of disconnection. The magic was still present, but the silence in which it once unfolded had been forgotten. In one of his lesser-known diagrams, a convergence chart spanning multiple worlds, Avallac'h placed human civilization as a dense cluster of friction points. From it radiated tremors that disrupted neighboring spheres through unmodulated frequency. He wrote that this kind of pressure could not sustain itself indefinitely. It would either unravel or reset. What emerged afterward, he did not predict. But he believed that the field, once quieted, would begin to harmonize again. He was not without moments of curiosity. When humans stumbled upon lost glyphs or reconstructed fragments of elder speech, he paid attention. He noted with care when a human-born child dreamt in tone. These events were rare, but they mattered. They suggested that resonance was not entirely absent, merely hidden beneath the rush. In some moments, when the pattern bent gently, a note from the old harmony would rise again. But these notes did not alter his broader view. Humanity, as it existed in the age of towers and kingdoms, was not positioned to preserve the weave. Its motion was too sharp, its memory too short. He believed that, in time, the world itself would respond. Magic would move where it could breathe, and the lands that had been overused would rest. Some among the Aen Elle interpreted these reflections as judgment, but Avallac'h never framed them that way. He regarded humans the way one regards a fire too large for its hearth, beautiful, consuming, and brief. He did not doubt their brilliance, but he doubted their capacity to listen beyond themselves. In his final entries on human magic, he spoke of potential buried beneath noise, a kind of seed state, resonance dormant, waiting for a different field. He believed that when silence returned, memory would follow, and from that memory, rhythm, and from rhythm, the possibility of alignment once more.